I was kidnapped by the militant group that now controls almost all of Syria.
Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS, Syria's most powerful militant group, overthrew Syrian President Assad in just 11 days. They captured every major city, including Damascus, forcing Assad to flee to Russia. This video isn't really about my kidnapping, but I've been covering this group for over a decade, and I know who they are under their new Western-friendly image. In 2012, Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, a former member of the Islamic State in Iraq, established Jabhat al-Nusra, Syria's al-Qaeda affiliate.
أبو محمد الجولاني أمير تنظيم جبهة النصرة وكيل في بلاد الشام عين الدكتور أيمن الظاهري أمير تنظيم القاعدة وقتال الكفار.
The group initially fought the Syrian government alongside the Free Syrian Army.
والله جثثهم منتشرة على الأرض وأسراهم بين أيدينا.
Before my kidnapping in 2016, I interviewed members of Jabhat al-Nusra in Turkey because al-Qaeda and ISIS could freely cross the Turkish border, which also meant that thousands of foreign fighters had no problem joining these groups.
والأجانب الذين يأتون من بعض الدول هم سعوديين وشيشان وأفغان من تونس ومن ليبيا. هناك بعض المقاتلين من جبهة النصرة من أمريكا والدول الأوروبية. أمريكان أصليين واعتنقوا الإسلام وهاجروا للجهاد في سبيل الله في سوريا.
But he's Syrian, so I wanted to know why he joined Nusra instead of the Free Syrian Army.
جبهة النصرة منظمة أكثر من الجيش السوري وعندهم نظام في العمل في الجبهة.
And while this is true,
الشعب السوري يحب جبهة النصرة لأن لن تأتي لتحكمهم أو تضيق عليهم.
This was absolutely untrue. The group ruled with fear and brutality. Nusra was designated a terror organization in the US, EU, Turkey, and many other countries. The US even put a $10 million bounty on Jolani's head. But this designation has been mostly cosmetic. The US and Turkey were never really fighting Nusra.
We're not fighting al-Nusra.
Over the years, HTS has changed its name several times. During my captivity in 2016, the group underwent its first rebrand, naming itself Jabhat al-Sham and announcing that it had split from al-Qaeda. In 2017, the group rebranded again and became HTS. These changes were surface level. The group is still behaving like al-Qaeda, as evidenced by Jolani's pride over the use of bombers.
نحن سنقول لهم لا بصوت عالي بلغة أخرى بالقنابل بالمفخخات بالرشاشات بالبنادق بالاقتحام بالاستشهاديين.
So it made sense that the latest rebranding project wasn't the group's name, it was their leader. We went to Syria shortly after the fall of Assad, and we asked people what they thought of Jolani.
تحب جولاني؟ أحمد الشرع.
Sorry, I meant Ahmad al-Sharra, because Jolani, who's rebranded himself Ahmad al-Sharra, now appears in Western media interviews in civilian clothes, presenting his extremist period as just a youthful phase.
لسه ما أعرف ما نعرف شو اللي ما أقدر أجاوب.
And on the topic of Jolani's youthful extremist phase, kidnapping foreigners was a key part of Nusra's operations. They abducted journalists and aid workers, accused them of being spies, and eventually exchanged them for ransom. They told me they planned to ask for $3 million for me, but I escaped with the help of a Free Syrian Army member. Most weren't so lucky, and Nusra held them for months or even years. When countries refused to pay Nusra to secure the release of their citizens from captivity, Qatar would step in with ransom money. Qatar was one of the primary financiers of Nusra and sent the group hundreds of millions of dollars through so-called charitable organizations. And while they were kidnapping foreigners and taking money from Qatar, Nusra was destroying factions of the Syrian opposition. Nusra attacked Harakat Hasam, the first Free Syrian Army faction to receive US support, and stole their American-supplied weapons and vehicles.
There were some reports that they had gotten their hands on some US food, even some heavy weapons. Nusra?
I have not seen any operational reporting that would substantiate claims that they got their hands on American-made equipment, food, or supplies.
Al-Nusra fighters show off weapons recovered from the Syrian Revolutionary Front. The weapons appear to be US-made.
These so-called revolutionaries spent more time fighting other rebel groups than fighting Assad. They called the Free Syrian Army flag, now Syria's national flag, the infidel flag. In March 2015, Nusra captured the city of Idlib. It became their stronghold, like what Raqqa was to ISIS. They turned it into their own mini-state, collecting taxes and controlling border crossings with Turkey. And just like ISIS, they carried out public executions, implemented strict Sharia law, and terrorized the population.
HTS and all its iterations have killed over 500 civilians.
They're holding thousands in arbitrary detention, including children, and they've forcibly disappeared thousands more. The methods of torture HTS uses in its prisons, like beatings, electrocution, stress positions, and sexual violence, are the same ones the Assad regime used in its prisons. Through its religious courts, HTS carries out brutal public executions for the alleged crimes of blasphemy and adultery. In the last 4 years, they've stoned 7 people to death, including 4 women, meaning these people were buried up to their chests and pelted with stones until they died. While HTS terrorizes adults, the group has also targeted children, recruiting boys as young as 12, and has used teenagers as human shields, bombers, snipers, and executioners. HTS doesn't just rule through violence. They also control daily civilian life through economic monopolies. HTS-affiliated fuel companies have the exclusive right to import gas into Idlib, forcing civilians to pay inflated prices. They control all financial services, internet, and even collect religious taxes from farmers' crops. The group is economically draining one of Syria's poorest regions. When HTS captured Aleppo a few weeks ago, they immediately emphasized their tolerance of minorities, and for good reason. Before the war in Syria, Aleppo was home to around 200,000 Christians. Even today, with 20,000 remaining, it represents Syria's largest Christian community. But in its stronghold of Idlib, with a pre-war Christian population of 10,000, only a few hundred remain. HTS seized over 1,300 Christian homes and businesses. It banned church bells and crosses, transformed some churches into military bases, and generally barred Christians from practicing their religious rituals openly. Now, church services are being filmed across Syria, but after a decade of persecution in Idlib, these gestures ring hollow, especially since these patterns of persecution seem to be continuing under HTS. Militants burned a Christmas tree in Damascus. Churches and Christian cemeteries have been desecrated. And there have been a constant stream of reports of violence against and even murders of minorities, especially Alawites. When people protested the murders, HTS opened fire on protesters. And then there were the HTS vehicles that rolled into Damascus with window decals that read, "We're coming for you, worshippers of the cross." After public outrage, the decals were removed. But the fact that they were there at all is a pretty good reflection of the mentality of the average HTS militant. There won't be any accountability for these acts because HTS denies responsibility or blames individuals. And because, as one militant who took part in the December offensive told me,
في إساءات حصلت في المناطق اللي اتحررت مجددا، بس صار في تكتم إعلامي عليها كبير. الإعلام ما عم بيظهر إلا الشيء الجيد الممتاز.
Which is another important point. There are hundreds of foreign reporters in Syria right now, and the widespread human rights abuses are largely happening under the radar. So how much worse will it get when the news cycle moves on and people stop paying attention?
You're okay. You're okay. Mike. You're okay.
Nusra members told me that the West was training and arming the Free Syrian Army to control Syria and to destroy Islam.
هذول الأشخاص عبقوا عطفوا عتاب ممتاز عبقوا تدريب عالي راح يكون لهم مشهد في الضبط وهذا المشهد راح يستخدموه للأجهزة الخاصة تبعتهم.
غايته إنه يتحكم فيهم لبين ما يصيروا الدخول الغرب لسوريا.
So it's ironic that this former al-Qaeda affiliate became the preferred rulers of Syria for the West. Then again, even a decade ago, when Nusra was at their most ISIS-like, America was never fighting this group.
I know it's not necessarily a satisfying answer, but we're not focused on the former al-Nusra front.
Remember how I mentioned that HTS is a designated terror organization? For countries like the US and Turkey, that was just for show. The US had a $10 million bounty on Jolani's head while everyone knew exactly where he was, giving interviews to Western media in Idlib. Former US envoy James Jeffrey even called HTS an asset to US strategy in Syria. Meanwhile, Turkey has been a more direct partner to HTS. The group even provides security escorts to Turkish military and delegations. After Turkey took control of much of the Free Syrian Army, renaming them the Syrian National Army, Turkey often used HTS as an enforcer against less obedient factions. And during the December offensive, Turkish-backed Syrian National Army factions fought alongside HTS. Turkey now occupies more than 8,000 square kilometers of Syria. In these areas, Turkish companies control everything from electricity to postal services, and the Turkish lira is the official currency. Israel, too, supported HTS for its own interests. For years, Israel gave medical aid to Nusra militants, and since the fall of Assad in December, Israel has occupied 400 more square kilometers of Syria, forced over 100 Syrian families out of their homes, and bombed Syrian military assets into oblivion.
People say I'm biased against HTS because they kidnapped me, and they're right.
But my feelings on this group don't matter. What matters is the millions of Syrians who never chose this fate. Their revolution against Assad was hijacked by foreign powers who replaced one brutal regime with another. The West handed Syria to jihadi terrorists just to weaken the regional influence of Russia and Iran. And now Syrians are trapped between Turkish occupation in the north, Israeli expansion in the south, and HTS terror everywhere else.